I used to think love was something you built like a house, brick by brick, choice by choice, held together by effort and intention. Not passion, not some grand gesture, just consistency. And I tried. God knows I tried. When I married Lisa, I walked into her world knowing it already had a rhythm of its own. Her daughter, Kayla, was 15 then, sharp-tongued, distant, too clever for her own good. I didn't try to be her dad. I wasn't foolish enough to believe I could replace anyone. I just wanted to be something stable for them. I wanted to be the man who picked up groceries without being asked, who installed the new water heater in January when it failed, who cleaned out the gutters before the rain came. And for a while, I convinced myself that was enough, that the silence at dinner and the way Lisa sometimes pulled away when I reached for her hand were just artifacts of transition, growing pains. But deep down, I knew I was loving them in a way they never intended to return. The house was mine. I had bought it just before Lisa and I married. A rundown colonial on the edge of town, the kind with drafty windows and floors that creaked in protest every time you took a step. She and Kayla moved in after the wedding, and I spent every weekend that first year fixing it up. Painted the exterior myself. Installed ceiling fans in each room. Built Kayla a desk from scratch when she started virtual school during the pandemic. I didn't ask for thanks. I wasn't keeping score. But it chipped at me slowly. The way Kayla never looked up from her phone when I entered a room, or how Lisa stopped saying we and went back to saying I. There were no shouting matches, no infidelity, no broken plates or slammed doors. Just a long, creeping kind of indifference that made me feel like a ghost haunting my own life. I remember the night I left down to the minute. We were at the dinner table. Lisa made pasta, the kind from the frozen bag she just dumped into a pan, no garlic bread, no wine. Kayla sat across from me, earbuds dangling from one ear, swirling her fork without eating. I had just mentioned something about a new bookcase I wanted to build in the den, trying to make conversation. That's when she looked up at me for the first time in weeks, tilted her head, and said, "Don't act like you built anything for this family. You're just a placeholder." Just like that. Flat, dismissive, and cold. I looked at Lisa, waiting for her to step in, to say something, anything. She didn't. She kept eating, eyes down. I felt the silence crawl across the table like a fog. That was the moment. Not the insult itself, but her silence. That was when I knew I was done pretending. So I raised my glass, iced tea, not wine, and said, "To the last dinner I'll ever attend in this house." I didn't shout. I didn't slam my glass or storm off. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and left my plate half full. I packed an overnight bag, drove to a cheap motel near the shore, and didn't look back. No one called. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not even after I texted Lisa and said I wouldn't be coming back. And that silence, too, was an answer. I spent the next few days walking the boardwalk in a hoodie, watching families gather around bonfires and couples hold hands like gravity alone wasn't enough. I had never felt more unmoored in my life. But at the same time, there was a strange peace in finally stepping outside of something that had stopped being mine long ago. It was on the 5th day that I found the shack. It wasn't listed, just appealing for sale sign stuck into overgrown grass at the edge of a dead-end street near the dunes. The front porch sagged. Windows boarded up. Inside smelled like sea rot and old paint. But I stood in the middle of the empty living room, breathing in the salt air leaking through the cracks, and for the first time in years, I felt something that almost resembled clarity. I didn't see ruin. I saw potential. I saw freedom. I saw a place I didn't have to justify my presence in. Within the week, I made an offer. All cash, below asking. The seller didn't argue. I never went back to the old house. Not to collect things, not to say goodbye. My lawyer handled everything. Legally, it was mine. I had paid every mortgage payment, signed every check, held the deed alone. Lisa had never asked for co-ownership. It had always been our house, in conversation, but only when it suited the moment. In truth, I had just let them live there. I think she forgot that. People do, when you give too much. When you love quietly, they assume it costs you nothing. So I let the lawyer do the talking. He drew up the eviction notice and served it clean. No warning. No preamble. Just a knock on the door, a signature, and 30 days to leave. It wasn't revenge. It was closure. Still, the silence haunted me sometimes. Not because I missed them, but because of how easily they had let me go. Like I had been holding the corners of a tent only to find the people inside never needed shelter to begin with. Kayla didn't send a text. Lisa didn't fight to keep the house. That hurt more than anything. Not the insult, not the dismissal, but the confirmation that I was never really one of them. Just a warm body filling a role. A placeholder. Temporary. Disposable. And the worst part? I had known it. Somewhere, deep in my bones. I had felt it for years and just kept hoping I was wrong. The night before the cafe opened, months after I'd left them for good, I stood behind the counter, alone, brushing sawdust off the shelves I had built by hand. I looked at the mismatched mugs hanging from hooks, the faded rug I found at a thrift store, the chalkboard sign that read "Open tomorrow. Come in and stay a while." It wasn't perfect. It didn't sparkle, but it was mine. No one could look at this place and call me a placeholder. I had built every corner, wired every light, chosen every book that lined the shelves. And in doing so, I'd given myself something no one else ever had, a place where I belonged without needing to prove it. It wasn't much to look at, not at first. The shack sat on a cracked foundation, its roof sagging like a tired old man who'd spent too many winters alone. There were 3 rooms, a narrow kitchen with yellowing linoleum, a living area no larger than a hospital waiting room, and a bedroom where the floor slanted just enough to make a dresser lean like it was whispering a secret. The walls were warped, streaked with water damage and nicotine stains. But when I stepped inside, I felt something no polished home had ever given me: permission. No expectations, no roles to fill, no scripts to follow. Just a space as broken and quiet as I felt. I didn't see mold and splinters. I saw a place I could fill with the sound of my own thoughts, where I didn't have to apologize for taking up space. I spent the first week sleeping on a cot in the living room with nothing but a camping lantern and a radio that crackled with static more than music. I showered at the gym down the road and cooked ramen on a hot plate. During the day, I wandered the nearby town, making note of shops that had closed down and ones that were barely hanging on. I kept circling back to this one stretch of beach where seagulls outnumbered people. It was quiet there, with smooth stones instead of sand, and the water never looked the same twice. One day, while sitting on the edge of a crumbling pier, I imagined a sign out front of the shack: salt and story, books, coffee, and second chances. I laughed at myself for even thinking it. But the idea stuck. It grew roots. The transformation started slow. I knocked out the rotten drywall, learned how to lay tile from YouTube videos, and spent hours sanding old wood until my knuckles bled. The work hurt, but it was the kind of pain that earned its keep. Unlike the silent kind I'd carried in that old house. The kind that made you question your worth in the eyes of people you loved. Here, every blister and bruise felt like proof. Proof that I could build something, even if no one was watching. Proof that I was more than a placeholder. I painted the front door deep navy blue, hung up secondhand curtains, and built the bookshelves myself from salvaged lumber I found behind a shuttered hardware store. I slept less, but I felt more alive than I had in years. The first person to wander in was an older woman named Dorothy, who wore oversized sunglasses and smelled faintly of rosewater and cigarettes. She didn't say much, just looked around, picked up a worn copy of To the Lighthouse, and asked, "You got coffee too? Or just heartbreak?" I laughed, told her it was instant for now, but real coffee was coming. She nodded, left $3 on the counter, and told me she'd be back next week. After that, others started trickling in. A local fisherman named Russ came by every morning at 7, always tracking sand through the doorway and asking if I had anything about the Civil War. A high schooler named Ava started stopping by after school, always in search of old poetry books and an excuse not to go home right away. Slowly, the place filled with voices that didn't expect anything from me except a good story and a clean mug. And then came the night I found a note slipped under the door. It was scrawled on a napkin in smudged blue ink. "This place feels like home. Thank you." No name, no explanation. I stood in the middle of the shop, holding that napkin like it was something sacred. In the house I left behind, I had poured years into building comfort for other people, redid the floors, repainted the walls, even landscaped the backyard by hand. And not once did anyone say it felt like home. Not once did anyone thank me. But here, in this crooked little shack that smelled of old paper and fresh paint, strangers were offering me the one thing I had spent years begging for in silence. Belonging. The shop became my rhythm. I opened at 8 a.m. every day, made fresh coffee by 8:30, and spent the rest of the morning rearranging books and chatting with whoever wandered in. I kept a notebook under the counter where I jotted down snippets of overheard conversations, favorite customer quotes, and thoughts too heavy to say out loud. In the afternoons, I hosted a little reading hour, mostly for retirees and bored locals, where I'd read a few chapters from whatever book seemed right that day. People began referring to the place simply as the book house. And somewhere along the way, I stopped checking my phone to see if Lisa had texted. I stopped looking for apologies that would never come. I stopped feeling like I needed to explain myself. One evening, as the sun bled orange over the horizon and the last customer shuffled out with a used copy of Slaughterhouse-Five, I locked the door, flipped the sign to closed, and stood alone in the stillness. I could hear the distant waves and the creak of old wood beneath my feet. I thought about Kayla, about how her voice had sounded that night. Sharp, cruel, certain. You're just a placeholder. She had said it with such finality, like a verdict. And for weeks, I'd carried those words like a tattoo burned beneath the skin. But standing there in my bookstore, surrounded by stories and strangers who saw me, I realized something. Placeholding is still holding. It's still showing up, still putting yourself between the cold world and the people you love, even if they never notice. I wasn't temporary. I was the one who stayed. They were the ones who let go. That night, I hung up the napkin note in a little frame by the register. I lit a candle in the back room, poured myself a glass of wine, and listened to a record that skipped every few minutes. I didn't miss the old house. Not really. I missed the man I had been in that house. The version of me who believed effort was always rewarded, that love would eventually be recognized. But I wasn't that man anymore. Every time I backed down from an argument to keep the peace, every time I said, "It's fine," when something hurt, I made myself smaller to fit into a family that never made room for me. I remembered this one night, maybe a year into our marriage, when I came home from a long day at work and found Lisa on the couch, crying. I sat beside her, held her hand, asked what was wrong. She told me Kayla had said she hated her, just flat out hated her, and that it had wrecked her. I stayed up all night with her, holding her while she sobbed. The next morning, Kayla apologized to her and went out for brunch with friends. No one asked how I slept. No one cared that I had stayed up comforting a woman who wouldn't even meet my eyes at breakfast. It wasn't just emotional labor, it was logistical too. I was the one who stayed on top of the bills, who remembered the water filter needed replacing, who scheduled the pest control appointments. I learned their rhythms, their routines, their moods. I learned to keep a bottle of Chardonnay in the fridge for Lisa after a rough day, and that Kayla liked her coffee with exactly 2 pumps of hazelnut creamer. I knew their world like the back of my hand, but they never learned mine. Lisa never asked what my favorite meal was. Kayla never knew I wrote poetry once, back before all of this, back when I believed in softness. I had given them 100 little pieces of myself, and they never even noticed they were holding me. The lawyer I hired was a friend of a friend, clean-cut, polite, with an edge in his voice I appreciated more than I expected. He walked me through the process of eviction and eventual sale with clinical precision. "You're not doing anything wrong," he said when I hesitated. "The house is legally yours. You don't owe them more than you've already given." But that wasn't the part that weighed on me. It wasn't about legality. It was about the feeling of walking away from something I built with my hands, knowing the people inside never saw me as anything but a financial cushion and an emotional afterthought. And worse, realizing they never would have left on their own. They would have kept using the lights I wired, soaking in the tub I installed, eating dinner on the porch I stained, all while pretending I was just passing through. One night, I found an old voice memo on my phone. It was from 2 years ago, late at night. I must have recorded it while walking the dog. You could hear the faint rustle of wind and my own voice saying, "Do you think we're becoming a real family?" Lisa's voice answered, soft and distant, "Of course we are. Why would you ask that?" I paused the memo there. Because I remembered exactly why I asked. It had been after Kayla left a nasty comment on one of my Facebook posts, mocking something I said about step-parenting. Lisa had laughed it off, said, "She's just being a teenager." But it had stuck with me. That memo was my attempt at reassurance. A digital breadcrumb I'd left myself in case the doubt got too loud later. And here it was, louder than ever. The moment I signed the paperwork to sell the house, something inside me cracked open. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even triumph. It was grief, clean, sharp, and unforgiving. I didn't cry. I just sat in my chair at the back of the bookstore, staring at the form that confirmed what I already knew. I had left something behind, and it wasn't just a building. It was a version of myself. The man who tried. The man who waited. The man who asked for so little and still got less. That man didn't live here anymore. He was buried in the drywall of that house, in the glue that held those baseboards down, in the screws that kept the porch from falling apart. And maybe that was okay. Maybe some parts of you have to die to make space for peace. That week, I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. Not Russ, not Dorothy, not Ava. The bookstore buzzed with its usual rhythm. Quiet mornings, lazy afternoons, poetry readings with too much wine. I smiled, shelved books, listened to stories. But inside, I was letting go. Letting go of the idea that family is owed your loyalty just because you shared a roof or a bed or a last name. Family, I'd learned, is who shows up when you're silent. Who sees you even when you're not holding something up for them. And for all the years I gave them, they never really looked. The eviction notice went out on a Monday. No special fanfare, no warning. Just a man in a gray blazer walking up the porch steps of a house I once thought I'd grow old in, knocking 3 times, and handing over a letter that would upend their lives. I imagined Lisa opening the envelope, reading the contents twice before she believed it, then scanning the living room I'd remodeled to see if reality had changed. It hadn't. 30 days to vacate. 30 days to pack up every memory they had made under a roof I built. It was surgical, precise, and unemotional. But when I hung up the phone after the lawyer confirmed delivery, my hand trembled. Not from regret. From the weight of finally pulling the last pin out of a grenade I'd been carrying inside me for years. Lisa called the next day. I let it ring twice before answering, standing behind the counter at the shop with my back to the window. "You're ruining everything," she said, her voice shaky, caught somewhere between anger and disbelief. I didn't respond at first. I let her sit in the silence. "This is spiteful, you know that? You're hurting Kayla. You're hurting me." She said it like I hadn't spent 5 years cushioning her falls. Like I hadn't worn my hands raw patching holes in walls she wouldn't acknowledge. "I built everything," I said finally. My voice was low, calm. "I'm not ruining it. I'm reclaiming it." And before she could speak again, I ended the call. Later that night, she left a voicemail. This time, her voice was colder, laced with control. "Fine. Take the house. It was never ours anyway. But don't expect anyone to forgive you for this. Kayla thinks you're pathetic. You'll die alone in that little shack with your sad little books." I listened to the message once. Then I played it again, slower. The words didn't hurt, not in the way she intended. They sounded hollow, like a final attempt to sting a man who no longer bled from the same wounds. I saved the voicemail, not as evidence, just as a reminder of who I used to be willing to lose myself for. The next morning, I poured coffee for a customer who called herself Mo. She was in her 60s, dressed in loose linen and dangling silver earrings, and she told me she used to run a bookshop in Portland before her husband died. "You're doing a beautiful thing here," she said, glancing around at the mismatched chairs, the watercolor prints, the bulletin board covered in handwritten notes from visitors. "Places like this save people." I smiled, said thank you, and handed her a copy of the bell jar. After she left, I stared at the receipt she'd scribbled a note on. "You feel like family already." That word, family, still caught in my throat sometimes, but not in the painful way it used to. Now it sounded like possibility, like a door cracked open instead of slammed shut. That weekend, the bookstore held its first open mic night. Russ, the fisherman, read a haiku about seagulls stealing his lunch. Ava, nervous and shaking, read a poem about a girl lost in the noise of her own home. I sat in the back, heart swelling, watching strangers lean forward in their chairs, clapping for people they'd only met minutes before. I'd built something real, something honest. No one here cared about my resume, my bank account, or my ability to fix a leaky faucet. They cared that the lights were warm, that the coffee was strong, that there was always a seat at the table. In that room, I wasn't a placeholder. I was a cornerstone. But even as joy took root in this new life, grief came in waves. One night, I dreamed of Kayla at age 10, even though I'd never known her then. She was in a Halloween costume, a cat, maybe, with face paint smudged and eyes wide with excitement. In the dream, she ran toward me, arms outstretched, and I knelt to catch her. But just before she reached me, she vanished. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. It was strange, mourning a version of someone that never existed. Mourning the possibility of what could have been, if only love had been enough to fix the fractures that ran too deep. In the days leading up to the closing, I kept waiting for some kind of final confrontation. Lisa showing up at the shop, maybe. A screaming match on the sidewalk. Kayla writing something cruel on social media. But nothing came. Just silence. Like they'd already written me off, filed me under irrelevant. And maybe they had to. Maybe admitting I had mattered, even for a second, would have unraveled the narrative they'd built to live with themselves. The idea that I was just a phase, a stand-in, a mistake. People rewrite history when it makes their own reflection easier to look at. When the sale finalized, I was at a regional book fair, manning a booth with hand-lettered signs and a tin cash box. I watched strangers thumb through pages I'd carefully selected, and I felt lighter, as if a ghost had finally left the room. I got the email confirmation around noon. Transfer complete. Funds deposited. Possession surrendered. I closed my eyes and exhaled. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just stood there, in the middle of a makeshift aisle smelling of popcorn and paper, and let it be done. That was the moment I moved on for good. That night, I returned to the Shack Turn Cafe and found a small crowd waiting out front. Word had spread about the book fair, about how our little shop had made an impression. People brought pie, stories, hand-drawn bookmarks. A little boy handed me a paper that said Best Bookman, with a crooked star in the corner. I taped it above the counter, next to the napkin note, and a growing collection of kindness I never saw coming. This wasn't just a store anymore. It was a harbor. For them. For me. For anyone who'd ever been pushed aside and told they didn't matter. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years trying to prove my value to people who had already made up their minds about me. And yet, the second I stopped trying, really stopped, they were the ones who lost something real. I didn't need their forgiveness. I needed to forgive myself for staying too long, for begging crumbs from a table I built. And I had. Every day in that little shop was an act of self-respect, of choosing presence over performance. No more placeholders. No more pretending. I didn't drive past the old house on the day it sold. I thought about it, felt the tug of closure like a ghost hand reaching from the past, but I ignored it. There was nothing for me on that street anymore. The house had been emptied, stripped, rekeyed. Whatever pieces of me had once lived inside it had long since been bled out by silence, neglect, and that final gutting betrayal over dinner. My lawyer called to confirm the buyer had wired the funds. "It's officially theirs," he said. I thanked him, hung up, and just stood there for a moment behind the cafe counter, staring at the espresso machine like it had asked me a question I didn't know how to answer. And then I breathed. A slow, full inhale that didn't catch in my chest for once. It was done. Final. Clean. When I'd bought that house, I remember feeling proud, like I had achieved something meaningful. It wasn't just a roof over my head. It was a future I could build on. I saw Lisa there. I saw holidays with Kayla, backyard BBQs, Sunday morning pancakes in pajamas. I saw framed family photos along the stairwell, a dog sleeping at the foot of our bed. And for a time, I tried to paint those pictures into reality. I bought the dog, cooked the breakfasts, hung photos, even if they were mostly of Lisa and Kayla, because I wanted them to feel like it was theirs too. But they never framed one with me in it. I noticed that more than I let on. How every image on the wall told a story I had no real part in. How I existed in the margins of their life, tolerated but never embraced. When I got home that evening, the cafe now fully closed, its windows dim. I walked into the little back room I had turned into a kind of sanctuary. There was an old armchair I'd reupholstered, a lamp with a frayed cord, and a wall covered in sticky notes and letters left by customers. In the middle of it was that one napkin note. "This place feels like home. Thank you." I stood in front of it for a long time. Not crying, not really smiling, just taking it in. The contrast. The ache of knowing that the only home I'd successfully built was the one I hadn't tried to force myself into. The home that happened because I stopped trying to prove I deserved one. A few days after the sale, I got a letter in the mail with no return address. The handwriting was familiar, tight, almost anxious cursive. "Lisa." I opened it slowly, half expecting venom, half hoping for something like closure. It wasn't long. Just 2 paragraphs. She said she hoped I was doing well, that Kayla had decided to live with her biological father for a while. She didn't apologize, not directly. But the tone had changed. No threats, no passive aggression. Just a hollow kind of update, like a postcard from someone who didn't know what else to say. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I didn't write back. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't unravel the peace I had finally found. The townspeople didn't know any of this, of course. To them, I was just the guy who opened the cozy bookstore cafe by the coast. The one who always remembered your name, who gave good book recommendations, who hosted poetry nights and donated extra muffins to the church shelter down the road. They didn't see the man who used to go to sleep wondering what he'd done wrong, what more he could give to be seen, to be chosen. And honestly, I liked it that way. There was something healing in being known only for who I was now, not for the man I used to fracture myself into just to feel needed. One morning, Ava, the high schooler who volunteered at the shop, asked me a question that caught me off guard. We were restocking the shelves when she looked up and said, "What made you open this place, anyway?" I paused, box of books in hand, heart thudding once before I answered. "I needed somewhere that didn't ask me to shrink to fit," I said. She looked at me like she understood, really understood. That's the thing about teenagers. They can see through you, especially when they've been hurt too. She nodded, went back to alphabetizing the fiction section, and didn't say another word. But in that moment, I felt more seen than I ever had at the dinner table of my old life. That same week, a couple from out of state stopped in during their vacation. They asked if the cafe was new, and I told them the story in vague terms, how I used to live inland, how I left everything behind to start over. The husband smiled and said, "You seem like someone who landed exactly where he's supposed to be." I wanted to believe him. And maybe I did. Because when I watched the sunset that evening through the wide front window, coffee cup in hand, I didn't feel like a man who had been left behind. I felt like a man who had walked away just in time. On the last Saturday of the month, we held a community potluck right in the cafe. We pushed tables together, played music from an old speaker, and let people bring dishes with handwritten labels. Russ brought smoked salmon, Dorothy brought a rhubarb pie, and someone brought deviled eggs that disappeared in 5 minutes flat. I sat at the far end of the table, wine in hand, surrounded by laughter and small talk and the easy comfort of people who expected nothing from me but my presence. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything just to be allowed to stay. After the guests left, I stayed behind and cleaned up slowly, humming a tune I didn't recognize. I wiped the counter, stacked the chairs, and lit one of the lavender candles Ava had given me for the front window. The night was still, warm, full of crickets and ocean breeze. I sat in the armchair, closed my eyes, and thought about the house, how it had probably been repainted by now, the swing set dismantled, the porch redecorated. A new family making new memories. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. They could have the space. I had taken back my name. It was a Thursday when Lisa showed up. The kind of gray October day where the sky looked like a ceiling you couldn't quite touch, and the ocean was moody and loud. I had just finished shelving a box of donated books, mostly battered romance paperbacks and a few forgotten classics, when I saw her through the front window. She hesitated before stepping inside, like even the doorway didn't know what to make of her anymore. She looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe it was just that I had grown. Not taller, not physically, but something about me had stretched in her absence. Self-worth, maybe. Boundaries. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and met her at the counter without saying a word. She looked around the cafe as if trying to place herself in it. Her gaze paused on the mismatched chairs, the local art on the walls, the leave a note, board covered in scribbled affirmations and favorite quotes. "You really left?" she said finally. Her voice was softer than the last time I heard it, more tired than angry. I nodded, not out of smugness, but because there was nothing else to say. I had left. Not just the house, not just the marriage, but the version of myself who tolerated silence as a substitute for love. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. "I thought maybe you'd come back. After some time." She paused, cleared her throat. Kayla did too, for a while. I didn't flinch, didn't bite at the bait of her name. I had already grieved that girl, the child I tried to love, who never saw me as more than an inconvenience. I didn't just leave, I said. I chose something better. For myself. My voice was calm, not cruel. There was no venom left in me, just truth. Lisa blinked slowly, her face folding slightly in on itself. "You could have told me you were selling the house," she said. "You didn't have to blindside us like that." I let out a breath through my nose, almost a laugh. "You sat there in silence while your daughter called me a placeholder. You watched me walk away and didn't say a word. That wasn't blindsiding. That was clarity." She looked like she wanted to argue, but the words didn't come. Instead, she nodded, just once, eyes glossy. There was something strange in that moment. Not forgiveness, not even closure really, but a mutual acknowledgement of the space that now existed between us. A quiet surrender. "It's nice in here," she said after a pause, her voice trying to land somewhere light. "Peaceful." I didn't thank her. Didn't offer coffee. This wasn't a visit. It was a final page being turned. She didn't linger. Just gave one last look at the shelves, the napkin note framed near the register, the quiet hum of music in the background. Then she left. The bell above the door jingled once and fell silent again. I stood behind the counter for a while, unmoving. The air felt heavier, not in a bad way, but in a way that made it easier to exhale. It was over. Not just the house, the marriage, or the years I'd poured into being enough for people who were never going to choose me. But the need for resolution, the gnawing ache for an apology that would never come. I thought I needed Lisa to explain, to regret. But I didn't. I just needed her to see what I'd built without her. And maybe, in some way, she had. That was enough. Later that evening, after the shop had closed and the regulars had all drifted back into the rhythms of their own lives, I sat at the table in the back room and opened a fresh notebook. The cover was leather, hand-stitched, a gift from Ava on her last day before heading off to college. "You need to start writing again," she had said, handing it to me with a half-smile. "Not for anyone else. Just for you." I hadn't touched it until now. But with the final ghost finally walked out of my cafe, I opened the first page and began to write. Not a story, not a letter, just the truth. I was never a placeholder. I was the foundation they didn't deserve. It poured that night, hard and steady. I stayed in the back room for hours, listening to the rain drum the roof like applause. I thought about all the things I had lost, time, energy, parts of myself I'd whittled down to be more acceptable, more useful, more convenient. I thought about Kayla and wondered if she had ever asked why I left, really asked, not just assumed it was out of spite. I wondered if she would ever understand how hard I had tried to love her, how I had fought every day to be steady in a life that kept shifting beneath my feet. Maybe she would. Maybe she wouldn't. That part was no longer mine to carry. The next morning, the cafe smelled like rain and cinnamon. I opened late, let myself linger in the quiet. The first customer was Dorothy, who brought a thermos of strong coffee and a newspaper. "You look lighter today," she said, scanning my face. I smiled, unsure how she knew. Maybe it was in the way I moved. Or maybe that's just what happens when you finally stop living for people who only ever saw you when they needed something. We sat for a bit, sharing silence like old friends. She never pried, never asked why I seemed different. She just sipped her coffee and handed me a section of the paper with a crossword circled in red. "Thought you'd like this one," she said. She was right. By noon, the shop was buzzing again. Kids laughing over cookies, retirees swapping stories, a man in the corner writing something longhand in a leather-bound journal. I moved through the space like someone who belonged, because I did. Every laugh, every kind word, Every act of kindness pinned to the wall was a brick in this new life. I hadn't just survived the fallout. I had built something sacred from its ashes. Not everyone gets that chance. But I had taken mine with both hands and turned it into a home. People still ask me if I regret it. Leaving, selling the house, choosing solitude over trying harder. And I always say the same thing. I didn't walk away from a family. I walked toward myself. There's a difference. Some people can't see it, but the ones who've been where I've been, they know. They understand what it means to be told you're temporary in a place where you've bled permanence. And they know how rare it is to find peace on the other side of that truth. I didn't find it in a person. I found it in pages, in steam rising from coffee cups, in laughter shared over dog-eared books. I locked up late that night, the cafe windows glowing soft in gold. Before turning off the lights, I stood at the front door and looked out at the quiet street. There were no more ghosts, no more what-ifs, just the steady rhythm of a life finally lived on my own terms. I didn't need a framed family photo to prove I belonged. I had bookmarks with thank you notes, Polaroids of poetry nights, sticky notes scribbled with quotes about healing. This place was mine, and so was I. If you've ever poured your heart into a family that made you feel invisible, this story was for you. Sometimes the people we fight hardest for are the ones who never planned to stay. And sometimes, walking away isn't giving up. It's finally choosing yourself. If this hit home, don't keep it to yourself. Like the video to support more stories like this. Share it with someone who needs to hear they're not alone. And subscribe for more raw, real-life narratives about love, loss, and reclaiming your worth. Your peace is worth protecting. See you soon in the next story. I'm tired of you. I have tolerated and endured the pain of living with you for the past 20 years. Now, I want to go away with my strong, energetic lover. My wife shouted at me when I asked her why she got back late from work. So I told her she could leave, but make sure to never return. 10 years on, what happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Alice Smith from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I never thought I'd become the kind of man who stayed silent while everything around him slowly died. But for 20 years, that's exactly what I did. I worked, provided, came home, and pretended not to notice how my wife looked through me like I was just another piece of old furniture in the house. I was the kind of husband who asked how your day was and truly wanted to know, but got used to hearing one-word answers in return. Fine. Long, tiring. I didn't push. I thought giving her space meant I was being respectful. What I was really doing was giving her room to resent me without consequence. I'd sit across the dinner table, watching her poke at her food, her phone always face down, but vibrating every few minutes. I noticed. Of course I did. But what do you do when your only real family is slowly slipping through your fingers and you're too afraid that if you squeeze too hard, they'll break? It wasn't always like that. There was a time, back in the early years, when she looked at me like I was the center of her world. We met when we were young and broke, and we dreamed together, planned together, and built a life brick by emotional brick. But something shifted after our daughter was born. Maybe it was postpartum depression no one talked about. Maybe it was the grind of bills and routines and unmet expectations. But slowly, she started closing off. I'd come home with takeout, hoping to surprise her, and she'd barely look up. Conversations died in our living room like birds hitting a glass window, sudden, painful, and without warning. I told myself she was tired, that it was just a phase, that we'd find each other again once things settled. 20 years of excuses. 20 years of convincing myself that loyalty meant waiting out the storm, even if the storm never passed. But deep down, I knew there was someone else. It was in the way she got dressed for work, adding just a little more perfume than usual. It was in how she started taking calls outside, whispering and laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years. The late nights became more frequent than regular. When I asked, she'd say, "We're short-staffed," or "Traffic was hell," and I'd nod, pretending to believe her. Pretending I was the fool she clearly thought I was. But I wasn't ready to confront it. Not because I didn't have the strength, but because I wasn't sure I could handle what I'd find on the other side of the truth. We had a daughter, a life, a home, and part of me thought maybe, just maybe, I was overreacting. That's the trap you fall into when you love someone who's slowly erasing you. You doubt yourself before you ever doubt them. That night, though, that final night, it all shattered. I'd been waiting for her. Dinner was cold, again. The clock had passed 10. When she finally walked through the door, she didn't even look at me. No apology. No explanation. Just a quick glance at her phone before heading upstairs. Something in me snapped. Not loud, not violent, but final. I stood up, walked to the bottom of the stairs, and asked, "Why are you coming home this late?" Again, she stopped, turned, looked at me like I was dirt on her shoe. And then she said it. Words that still echo in my head even now. "I'm tired of you. I have tolerated and endured the pain of living with you for the past 20 years. Now, I want to go away with my strong, energetic lover." Just like that. Not a hint of remorse. Just venom, poured out like it had been boiling inside her all this time. I stared at her, stunned. The thing about betrayal is it doesn't feel like a knife in your back. It feels like your lungs collapsing, your heart sinking, and your ears ringing all at once. I wanted to yell, to cry, to ask her how she could throw away everything we built. But I didn't. I just looked at her, breathing deeply, and said the only words I knew I wouldn't regret. Then go. But make sure to never return. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg her to stay. And maybe that's what shocked her the most. She expected rage, or maybe even a breakdown. But I gave her silence. And that silence was louder than anything I could have screamed. She left the next morning without saying a word to me. Took a single suitcase, some toiletries, and didn't even hug our daughter goodbye. That part still haunts me. How she could walk away not just from me, but from the little girl who once cried every time her mother left the room. I sat on the edge of our bed for a long time after she was gone, feeling like a ghost in my own life. Our daughter was 13 then, old enough to sense the shift, young enough to pretend it wasn't happening. I remember the way she peeked into my room that morning, eyes wide and confused, and asked, "Is Mom coming back?" I wanted to lie. God, I wanted to lie. But I just shook my head and said, "Not this time, baby." That was the beginning of everything and the end of everything all at once. I buried myself in work, not because I wanted to, but because it was the only place where I didn't feel like a failure. I built my business brick by brick, the way I had once built my marriage. But this time, the effort didn't go unreturned. Every late night, every client pitch, every hard lesson added something to me rather than taking something away. And slowly, I found myself again, not the man she walked away from, but the man I had always wanted to be. Strong, respected, at peace. But make no mistake, that peace came with scars. And yet, through it all, I kept quiet. I never told our daughter the real reason her mother left. I let her form her own relationship, however fractured, with the woman who abandoned us both. I didn't badmouth her. I didn't gloat when things started falling apart on her end. I just lived. I healed. And I waited, not for her to return, but for the day I could stand tall and say, "You didn't break me." That day would come sooner than I expected, and when it did, she would be the one watching me from the sidelines. The day she left, I stood in the hallway long after the door shut behind her, staring at the empty space where her suitcase had been. I wasn't just watching my wife leave. I was watching 20 years of silence walk out the door. And for the first time in 2 decades, I finally heard my own voice. The first morning without her felt too quiet, almost unreal, like waking up in a stranger's house where everything was familiar but no longer yours. The silence was no longer just a sign of emotional distance. It had become a physical reality. I lay in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling fan as it rotated slowly above me, making the same dull clicking noise I used to complain about but never fixed. Funny how insignificant things suddenly carry weight when you're alone. The scent of her perfume still lingered faintly on her pillow, and I hated myself for noticing. I got up, made coffee like I always did, poured 2 mugs out of habit, then stood there looking at the second cup until it went cold. That was my first lesson in heartbreak. It isn't loud. It's in the small, repetitive moments that remind you someone is gone long after they've left. My daughter, Ava, didn't come down right away. She usually did. Every morning since she was a child, she'd sit at the kitchen island, yawning and asking what day it was, like the world had reset overnight. But that day, the house stayed still. When she finally appeared, wrapped in her oversized hoodie, eyes still puffy from sleep, she didn't say anything at first. She just looked around, noticed the empty mug, then sat down quietly. "Is she really not coming back?" she asked, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. I didn't know how to answer that. There's no manual for this kind of thing. So I said what I knew to be true. "No, baby. She's not." She nodded, looked down at the counter, and started picking at a scratch in the wood with her thumbnail. I stood behind her, unsure whether to hug her or give her space. In the end, I just whispered, "We'll be okay." But inside, I wasn't sure I believed that yet. In the following weeks, I functioned on autopilot. Work became my shield, my distraction, my excuse not to feel things too deeply. I'd leave the house early, get to the office before anyone else, and bury myself in spreadsheets, calls, and contract drafts. I stopped eating properly, just coffee and vending machine snacks, and barely slept. But I didn't complain, and I didn't fall apart, because I couldn't afford to. I had Ava watching me, and she needed to see that we were going to be all right. My business, which had been steady but unspectacular for years, suddenly became the center of my life. I took risks I'd been too cautious to take before. I said yes to late meetings, yes to investor pitches, yes to expanding into new cities. Failure no longer scared me. I had already lost the one thing I thought I couldn't live without. And yet, here I was, still standing. But surviving isn't the same as living. At night, when the house was quiet and Ava was asleep, the grief would creep in. I'd lie in bed staring at my phone, sometimes scrolling through old photos, vacations, birthday parties, candid smiles that now felt like lies. I wanted to hate her, and some nights I did. But other nights, the sadness came stronger than the anger. I'd wonder what I could have done differently. Was I too boring? Too predictable? Did I miss signs I should have acted on earlier? And worst of all, was I so unlovable that she had to walk away without even trying to fix us? Those were the thoughts that haunted me most. Not the betrayal itself, but the quiet implication that I had never been enough to begin with. That maybe all my efforts to keep the family together had only delayed the inevitable. It was Ava who unknowingly saved me from completely drowning in those thoughts. She started leaving little notes for me on the fridge, things like, "Have a good day, Dad," or "Don't forget to eat." And they meant more than she probably realized. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find she had cooked dinner. Just pasta with Jared sauce and garlic bread from the freezer, but it hit me harder than any gourmet meal could have. She sat across from me, twirling spaghetti on her fork, and said, "You know, you don't have to pretend around me. I'm not a kid anymore." And she wasn't. Life had made her grow up fast. I reached across the table, squeezed her hand, and promised that we were going to rebuild, not just our life, but our happiness. One brick at a time. Around that same time, an old friend of mine, Marcus, invited me to a small networking event. I didn't want to go. The idea of making small talk while pretending my life wasn't in shambles didn't appeal to me. But Marcus wouldn't take no for an answer. "You've been hiding long enough," he said. "Come out, show your face. Let people see you haven't crumbled." So I went. And that night changed everything. I met potential partners who were excited about expanding my business model into new markets. I left with 3 meetings scheduled and a new kind of fire in my chest. It wasn't about revenge, at least not consciously. It was about becoming someone I respected again. I didn't just want to survive the divorce. I wanted to come out of it better than I'd ever been. Still, there were setbacks. I'd get emails from her occasionally, short, logistical things at first, about Ava's school or shared finances. I kept things cold but civil. Then came the subtle digs. "Ava told me you've been working a lot. Don't forget she still needs you." Or, "Funny how you have time to grow your company now, but not when we were together." I ignored them. Every response she wanted, I kept inside. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because giving her access to my emotions felt like giving her power. She had chosen her path. I was now building mine, and I refused to let her derail it with guilt. It took over a year before I genuinely smiled again without forcing it. I started dating, cautiously, unsure whether I was ready. Most fizzled quickly. But then I met Lena. She was calm, intelligent, and curious, not flashy or intense, just real. Our first date wasn't some whirlwind romance, but it felt solid. Easy. She asked questions no one had asked me in a long time, like, what makes you happy outside of work? And what did you learn from your last relationship? And when I told her the truth about the years of silence, the affair, the sudden exit, she didn't flinch or pity me. She just said, "You must have loved her a lot to stay that long. But now it's time you start loving yourself more." That line stuck with me. It still does. One night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, freshly showered, suit hanging on the door for the next morning's investor meeting. For the first time in years, I looked at my reflection and didn't see a broken man. I saw a father, a builder, a survivor. I saw a man picking up the pieces, not to go back to what he had, but to build something stronger from the ground up. Falling in love again wasn't part of the plan. After everything I'd been through, love felt like a dangerous gamble I couldn't afford to make twice. I wasn't bitter, I was cautious. I had spent too many nights staring at the ceiling, wondering how someone could stop loving you while still sharing your bed. Too many days pretending everything was fine when I knew something was dying right in front of me. So, when Lena came into my life, I kept my guard up. She was warm, but not clingy. Soft-spoken, but observant. The kind of woman who didn't ask to be the center of your world. She just quietly made space for herself there, if you let her. Our early conversations were slow, careful. She never pushed. She'd just listen, ask questions, and give me the time to answer in my own way. That was new for me. With my ex-wife, I was always trying to win attention, earn affection. With Lena, I didn't have to perform. I just had to be present. We took things slow, deliberately slow. I didn't introduce her to Ava for months. I wanted to make sure I wasn't mistaking comfort for connection. But the more time I spent with her, the more I realized I didn't feel drained. That was the difference. With my ex, I often felt like I was trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much love I poured in, it was never enough. But Lena? She held space for me. She had her own life, her own passions, and she never once tried to fix me. Instead, she offered understanding in the quiet moments, like when I'd go silent after a joke reminded me of the past, or when I flinched at certain songs on the radio. "Take your time," she'd say gently. "You don't owe me an explanation for your scars." That kind of patience, that kind of grace, it floored me. The day Ava met her, I was nervous in a way I hadn't been since middle school. I kept pacing the living room, adjusting pillows that didn't need adjusting, checking the time every 2 minutes. Lena noticed, but didn't comment. She just gave me a reassuring smile, the kind that says, "We'll be okay, no matter what happens." Ava walked in from school, dropped her backpack, and looked at us with that sharp teenage intuition that sees more than you want it to. "So you're Lena," she said, arms crossed but not hostile. Lena stood, extended her hand, and said, "Nice to finally meet you. Your dad talks about you all the time." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Good things, I hope." They both laughed, and just like that, the tension broke. It wasn't immediate, but over time, they built their own quiet bond, rooted in respect, not replacement. And that mattered to me more than I can explain. As months turned into years, everything began to settle in ways I hadn't expected. My business, once the only thing holding me together, started thriving beyond what I had imagined. New contracts came in. Old partnerships expanded. I hired a team I trusted and even took weekends off, something I hadn't done in over a decade. Lena and I moved in together, slowly blending our routines. She brought calm into the house. Not excitement, not chaos, just calm. The kind that wraps around you at the end of a hard day and whispers, "You're safe now." And Ava? She graduated high school with honors and told me she wanted to go into medicine. "I want to help people who feel like they've been ignored," she said. I knew where that came from. She had watched me struggle in silence for too long, and I think, in her own way, she wanted to make sure others didn't have to. And yet, even in all that peace, the past had a way of knocking when you least expected it. One day, Ava came home quiet. She wasn't sullen, just thoughtful. I asked her what was up, and she said, "Mom called today. She wanted to meet for lunch." My stomach tightened, not from jealousy or fear, but from old wounds being poked open. I nodded. "And did you go?" She hesitated, then said, "Yeah." I was curious. I didn't press. She didn't owe me her loyalty like that. Not between her and her mother. She continued, "She asked about you. Said she's happy for you. But, I don't know, Dad." She looked kind of lost. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to ask 100 questions. Part of me wanted to change the subject. Instead, I said, "She made her choices. We all live with ours." Ava just nodded, and we left it there. What struck me most during those years was how deeply people underestimate the power of peace. Not success, not revenge, just peace. I used to think I needed to prove something, to her, to everyone. That I wasn't boring, that I wasn't weak, that I hadn't driven her away. But the more I built this new life, the less I needed to prove anything. My revenge, if you could even call it that, wasn't in making her jealous. It was in building a world so full of love and stability that she no longer had the power to touch it. There's something sacred in that kind of detachment, not bitterness, but release. And the best part? It wasn't loud. It was in Lena's hand resting on mine during quiet dinners. It was in Ava's laughter echoing through the house. It was in the silence I used to fear, now filled with comfort instead of dread. One weekend, Lena and I attended a fundraiser for the local hospital where Ava was doing her internship. She gave a small speech, nervous at first, then steady. She spoke about resilience, about being raised by a single father who taught her how to rebuild even when everything around you feels broken. She didn't mention her mother, not out of spite, but because some absences are too loud to ignore and too painful to name. When she finished, people stood and applauded. Lena squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. "You did good," she whispered. And for the first time in a long, long time, I believed it. That night, as we drove home under the quiet glow of streetlights, Ava asleep in the back seat and Lena humming softly to a song on the radio, I realized something profound. I had spent so long surviving the storm that I had forgotten what it meant to feel safe in the sunshine. And now, finally, I was home. The morning of Ava's graduation came with a quiet sort of pride I'd never felt before. Not the kind you post online or brag about in passing conversation, but the kind that swells silently in your chest, filling the space where grief and anger used to live. She had made it. My little girl, who once asked if her mother was ever coming home, now stood poised to receive her medical degree. The same girl who cried into my chest on nights when the house felt too empty, who watched me rebuild a broken life with nothing but my bare hands and unwavering love, was now a woman in a white coat. I stood in the mirror that morning, adjusting my tie, noticing the flecks of gray in my beard and the crow's feet deepening at the corners of my eyes. But for once, they didn't bother me. I had earned those lines. They were the price of survival. And this was the reward. Lena was in the bedroom, zipping up her navy blue dress, her hair pinned back in soft waves. She glanced at me and smiled, one of those small, knowing smiles that said everything without words. "Big day," she said softly. "You ready?" I nodded, but truthfully, I wasn't. Not because I wasn't proud. I was more proud than I could ever articulate, but because I knew what the day would bring. I had heard through family whispers that my ex-wife, Cassandra, was planning to attend. She had been largely absent from Ava's academic journey, sending the occasional gift card or text message, always just enough to be seen, but never enough to matter. Ava never said much about it, and I never asked. That was their relationship to manage. But deep down, I knew the silence had carved itself into her just as deeply as it had in me. We arrived early, partly to get good seats and partly because I wanted a moment to take it all in before the inevitable awkwardness began. The campus was buzzing with families. Parents carrying balloons and flowers, proud tears already forming in their eyes. I stood with Lena on the edge of the crowd, watching students in their gowns hug professors, take selfies, and scream with joy. Then I saw her, Ava, walking toward us in her cap and gown, her face radiant. I could have sworn the world slowed down for a moment. She ran into my arms, nearly knocking me off balance, and I laughed like I hadn't in weeks. You did it, I whispered into her hair. You really did it. She pulled back, tears in her eyes, and said, We did, Dad. We did. Lena hugged her next, and I watched the two most important women in my life hold each other tightly. And for a fleeting moment, the past didn't matter. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw her, Cassandra. She stood near the edge of the crowd, alone, wearing a crisp blazer and dark sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She hadn't changed much, at least not outwardly. Still tall, still composed, still carrying herself like someone who expected the world to fall in line. But there was something different in her posture, a stiffness that hadn't been there before, a hesitancy. She hovered, unsure whether to approach. Ava noticed her too. Her smile faltered for a second, then returned just as quickly. I'm going to say hi, she said. I nodded, giving her space. She walked over, and I watched the exchange from a distance. Brief hug, polite words, an awkward pause. Cassandra reached out as if to touch her cheek, but Ava pulled back, subtly, and I felt a flicker of something I couldn't name. Not triumph, not revenge, just confirmation. Cassandra approached us a few minutes later. Hi, she said, her voice tighter than I remembered. Congratulations to all of us, I guess. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in over a decade. There were lines on her face too, but unlike mine, they didn't look earned. They looked heavy, like regrets etched into her skin. Hello, I said evenly. She's worked hard. She deserves all of this. Lena reached out politely. Nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you. Cassandra hesitated, then shook her hand. I'm sure you have. Her tone wasn't rude, but there was something underneath it, something brittle. I didn't rise to meet it. I just looked at her and smiled the kind of smile that says, You don't live here anymore. And then, just like that, she drifted away. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Ava walked across the stage, her name echoing through the auditorium, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek before I could catch it. Lena reached over and squeezed my hand, grounding me. Cassandra sat 3 rows behind us, alone. I didn't turn around once. Afterward, we took photos, laughed, hugged Ava's friends, and beamed with the kind of pride that doesn't need to be explained. Cassandra tried to insert herself once or twice, asking for a picture, offering to help carry gifts, but Ava politely declined each time. We've got it, Mom, she said, not unkindly, but with finality. And Cassandra nodded, stepped back, and said nothing more. Watching her from a distance, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel satisfaction. What I felt was distance, the kind that comes from years of silence, of abandonment, of choosing someone else over your own family, and realizing too late that the door you slammed behind you has locked itself for good. 2 days later, the message came. A simple, hey, I saw you the other day. You look good. Happy. I miss what we had. I miss you. I stared at it for a long time. 10 years. 10 years without a single word of remorse. And now, after all the dust had settled, when everything was calm, she wanted to rewrite history. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The next day came another message. Then another. She tried jokes. She tried nostalgia. Then she tried guilt. I know I hurt you. I was lost. But we had something real, didn't we? No, we didn't. What we had was me carrying the weight of our life, while she measured my worth against someone else's fire. I blocked her the next day, not out of anger, out of peace. As I sat in the backyard that evening, watching Ava pack her things for the next phase of her life, Lena beside me sipping tea, the sky a soft shade of orange, I finally understood the power of stillness. Cassandra had left me broken, but she came back to find me whole, and that, I realized, was all the closure I'd ever need. I used to think the past stayed buried if you ignored it long enough. That time, success, and distance could put enough concrete between you and what hurt you to build a new life on top of it. And for a while, that felt true. But the thing about unfinished business is that it doesn't go away, it waits. It waits until you're finally breathing easy, until your heart beats without fear, until the walls you built to keep the pain out have grown soft with comfort. That's when it strikes. Cassandra's first message had been easy to dismiss. The second, too. But by the fifth, when the tone shifted from nostalgic to needy, then from needy to entitled, I knew I wasn't just ignoring a nuisance. I was witnessing the unraveling of someone who thought she'd always have a key to the house she once abandoned. At first, I didn't tell Lena. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I didn't want to disrupt the calm we had built. We had worked so hard, through awkward transitions, parenting challenges, late-night doubts, to find a rhythm that worked for both of us. Lena never demanded my full story. She accepted the pieces I gave her and never asked for more than I was ready to share. But this, Cassandra's sudden reappearance in my inbox with her messages that grew longer, bolder, and less filtered by shame, wasn't something I could shoulder alone anymore. One night, as Lena folded laundry in our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and handed her my phone. "She's been messaging me," I said quietly. "Cassandra." Lena didn't flinch. She read each message carefully, her expression calm, unreadable. When she finished, she looked at me and said, "Are you okay?" And just like that, I felt the weight shift. Not away, but shared. I thought the blocking would be the end of it, that I could draw a clear line in the sand and she'd respect it. But of course, that's not how people like Cassandra operate. A few days later, a new message popped up on my business page, disguised as a customer inquiry, but unmistakably her. "Do you ever think about what we could have been if things were different?" The gall of it left me stunned. I deleted it without answering, then strengthened every privacy setting I could find. But it didn't stop there. A cousin of mine texted me. "Hey, did you know Cassandra's been asking around about you? Said she wants to make things right." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Every attempt she made to claw her way back into my life only confirmed what I already knew. She didn't miss me. She missed what I had become without her. What stung the most, though, was how it started to reach Ava. My daughter was no fool. She had lived through the silence, the abandonment, the late-night tears she thought I didn't hear. But when your mother starts playing the redemption card, even the strongest daughters start to question their own memories. One evening, after dinner, Ava sat across from me on the patio, legs curled under her, phone in hand. She looked uncertain, like she was choosing her words carefully. "Dad," she said slowly, "can I ask you something personal?" I nodded. "Did you ever love her? I mean, really love her?" I felt my chest tighten. "Yes," I said after a pause. "More than anything. For a long time." "What?" She looked away. "She keeps texting me. Says she made a mistake. That she regrets leaving you. That she wishes things could be different." I took a deep breath and let the truth settle between us. "She might regret it, Ava. But that doesn't mean it wasn't a choice." Ava was quiet for a while after that. She didn't cry. She didn't storm off. She just looked at me like she was trying to reconcile two versions of the same story, her mother's version and mine. "Do you think she really changed?" she asked finally. I shook my head slowly. "I think she's sorry she lost the life she could have had. But that's not the same as being sorry for what she did." Ava nodded, but I could see the conflict in her. She was an adult now, smart, rational, compassionate, but this was her mother. And even the most rational minds struggle when it comes to blood. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to pick sides," I said. "You're allowed to love her. But just know, I'm not going back. Not ever." That was my line in the sand. For me, for Lena, for the life we had built from the ashes. Still, Cassandra didn't stop. She tried another angle, this time through Ava. Messages that blurred boundaries. "Does your dad ever talk about me? I still remember our trip to the lake. Does he? Tell him I'm proud of him." It wasn't direct, but it was insidious. I found out when Ava, exhausted and frustrated, finally showed me the string of texts. "I didn't know what to say anymore," she admitted. "She's making it all about you now." I took the phone, scrolled through the messages, and felt an anger I hadn't touched in years bubble up. Not rage, not even hatred, just a deep, boiling resentment that she would dare use our daughter as a vessel for her guilt. "I'll handle it," I said. "No," Ava replied firmly. "I will." She blocked her right then and there. "She's not going to use me to get to you," she said. And for the first time, I saw in her the same boundary I had fought so hard to build. It made me proud and a little heartbroken. In the weeks that followed, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't the kind that choked me. It was peace. I started sleeping better. Lena and I took a weekend trip, just the two of us. We laughed more, cooked together, made plans for the future. Ava packed her things for her residency with a renewed focus, no longer looking over her shoulder. And I, for once, felt like the chapter had truly closed. Not slammed shut, just sealed, clean, firm, final. Cassandra had tried to come back not because she loved me, but because she couldn't stand seeing me loved by someone else. That was the truth. And the thing about truth is, once you see it clearly, it loses its power to hurt you. That night, as I stood by the window watching the rain tap against the glass, Lena came up behind me, wrapped her arms around my waist, and whispered, "You did the right thing." I nodded, resting my hand on hers. "I know," I said. This time I finally did. 10 years ago, I had no idea what healing would look like. I thought it might come as a single moment, some sweeping cinematic gesture where everything would suddenly make sense and the pain would finally let go. But the truth is, healing didn't arrive like that. It came slowly, in fragments, in quiet evenings with Lena reading beside me. It came in the sound of Ava laughing in another room, in waking up without that familiar knot in my chest, in realizing that I didn't miss Cassandra. I missed the version of myself I thought I had to be for her. Now, as I stood at the edge of my backyard watching the sunset bleed gold into the sky, I realized I wasn't carrying the weight anymore. The burden of her betrayal, the guilt of staying too long, the ache of being left behind, all of it had been put down, piece by piece, until my hands were finally free. Ava had officially moved into her new apartment near the hospital where she would begin her residency. She had called earlier to let me know she was unpacked, tired, but excited. "It still feels weird," she said, "like I'm waiting for something to go wrong." I told her I knew that feeling well. It's what happens when life has taught you not to trust the quiet. But I reminded her that she had earned this stillness, that she didn't need to brace for impact anymore. "You're not that scared little girl waiting for someone to come home," I said. "You're the one building a home now. That's different." She didn't say anything for a second, then whispered, "Thanks, Dad." Those two words, simple, soft, unadorned, carried more weight than any apology I'd ever gotten from her mother. They weren't just gratitude. They were acknowledgement. Recognition that the man who raised her had done right by her, even when it cost him everything. Lena came outside with 2 cups of tea, handing me one without a word. She always knew when I needed quiet more than conversation. We sat on the porch in our usual chairs, the kind that creaked slightly when you leaned too far back, watching the wind stir through the trees. For a long time, we didn't speak. Then she asked, "Do you still think about her?" Her voice wasn't jealous or bitter, just curious. I nodded, not to lie, but to be honest. "Sometimes," I said, "but not in the way I used to. I don't replay the pain anymore. I don't wonder what I did wrong." She looked over at me, waiting. "Now I just think about how much of my life I almost lost trying to hold on to someone who never planned to stay." Lena nodded, her hand slipping into mine. "You didn't lose your life," she said gently. "You found the part that mattered." And in that moment, I knew she was right. I had spent so long wondering if forgiveness meant letting Cassandra back into my life. If I didn't respond with anger, did it mean I was welcoming her? If I ignored her messages but still thought about what she did, was I truly free? But as the months passed, I realized something important. Forgiveness isn't about them. It's about you. It's about deciding not to carry their mistakes like a backpack full of stones. It's about choosing peace even when the apology never comes. And yes, Cassandra never truly apologized, not in a way that mattered. Her messages had been self-serving, manipulative, wrapped in sentiment, but hollow at the core. She wanted absolution without accountability. A reset button on a game she had forfeited long ago. But life doesn't offer do-overs like that. Not when you walk away from the people who would have given you everything. She had faded now, not from memory, but from presence. No more messages. No more inquiries. Even the gossip from mutual acquaintances had died down. Apparently, her second marriage didn't last more than 2 years. Her lover, her energetic escape, had grown tired of responsibility. There were rumors of debts, of strained friendships, of her trying to rebuild yet again. But none of that was my concern anymore. There was a time I might have felt vindicated by her downfall. A time when I would have quietly celebrated every misfortune that came her way. But that wasn't me anymore. I didn't need her to fail for me to win. My victory had never been about revenge. It was about rising in spite of everything. I had a daughter with a future, a home filled with laughter, a wife who saw me clearly, and a business that grew because I no longer spent my energy trying to prove my worth to people who discounted it. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew one day she might appear again. A knock on the door, a sudden email, a request to meet, just to talk. But I also knew what I would say if that moment came. I had rehearsed it, not out of spite, but out of certainty. I would look her in the eye and tell her the truth she had never been willing to face. You didn't break me. You just set me free. And I would mean it. Because sometimes the people who leave you in ruins are the very reason you finally learn how to build with stone instead of straw. And no matter what she tried to reclaim, she would never again have access to the life I rebuilt without her. That door had closed, not with a slam, but with a gentle, deliberate click. And on this side of it, everything was whole. As the sun slipped behind the trees and the sky turned that deep, quiet blue that signals the day's end, I took a sip of my tea and exhaled slowly. This was peace, not perfection, not the absence of scars, but the freedom to live without looking over my shoulder. I had made my choices. I had stood firm. And I had finally, fully, come home to myself. Some people walk out thinking they've won. But the real victory comes when you stop waiting for closure and start building a life that makes their return irrelevant. Have you ever had to stand firm and choose peace over chaos? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more true life stories about betrayal, healing, and reclaiming your worth. See you soon in the next story.